Welcome to the Inclusion Cafe. This episode in the cafe, I have with me Dominic Longo. Dominic, welcome to the Inclusion Cafe.
Thank you, Joe. Glad to be here.
I'm so excited to have you here. You and I have been trying to get this locked down for a little while now, and now we do. So I've got to know you over a past couple conversations, but let's let the listeners and the audience get to know you. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Well, I am in New York City, and my work is called Flourishing Gays. My focus is on helping highly accomplished men in the LGBTQ community to grow as human beings and as leaders. I also do some work for companies who are maybe beginning out their diversity, equity, and inclusion journey and don't know where to start. So I have a background in management consulting that I bring to bear on especially the intersection of leadership development and diversity and inclusion.
Perfect, perfect. And you have a unique background, kind of a unique journey to where you're at now, right?
Yeah, my life has been a windy road in many ways, an enjoyable journey. But yes, I've done a few different things in my life.
Yeah, we're going to dive into some of those starting out here. I know one of the things we mentioned we'd like to talk about is the subject of intersectionality, sexual orientation, and religion, and the impact that intersectionality has on those two kind of topics in areas. So let's talk a little bit about that. I mean, what what impacts those things?
Um, well, I guess one piece of my background that I should just name here is that I'm both a Catholic theologian and a scholar of Islam.
Yeah,
So I come to questions of religious orientation, uh, with those hats on,
yeah,
as with a Ph.D. in Arabic and Islamic studies, and a member of the Catholic Theological Society of America, and these kinds of things. So I, and then I'm also a gay man and an American and Italian American. So all of these parts of myself get sort of lit up, right,
mm,
when you ask the question about intersectionality and how religion and sexual orientation in particular, and I would add gender and nationality and ethnicity, they all influence one another like kind of gears in a machine, or like pieces in a mosaic. So that's maybe a little bit abstract, but uh, I think intersectionality as a concept is in a way a powerful one to just recognize how these different aspects of human identity um, inter interweave and influence one another.
yeah. When I think about so how to phrase this, the LGBTQ community, right, and kind of independent culture and religion as a culture, how, and not how, but what are some of the things or processes of kind of how those kind of interweave and kind of come together? Because sometimes, and and let me just talk a little bit about my background really fast. So I have a college degree in biblical studies from Liberty University. I was a, for lack of better word, a born again Christian. Very on fire for God for a portion of my life.
Yeah.
But I went through a shift about 4 years ago to
Hmm.
where now I'm on the other side of the coin, right? When it comes to things like that. And we'll get to one of the questions I want us to talk about in a little bit that drive this home. But back in my time, at least on the denomination and religion that I was a part of, I mean, there was some separation there, right? There was a divide, so to speak, right? In those two cultures and communities. So can you kind of just share some insight on that, like how they're weaving together? And yeah, we'll just leave it there.
Sure. Yeah. Where that brings me, that question, is to the sort of Christian theological ideas of salvation,
Yeah.
And which implies liberation. It,
Yes.
it implies destiny, something about vocation, to use another Christian religious term. From the experience of queer people, of LGBTQ folks, we might translate salvation and vocation into secular terms. Coming out as gay, coming out as trans, coming out as queer can have the valence of being saved,
Wow.
of 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 finding oneself,
Wow.
of listening to the universe. Well, what am I called to?
Yeah.
Who was I made to be? What is my destiny? How am I called to love and to be loved in this world? So you can hear, in a way, the kind of religious questions that are familiar from your background in the Christian religion, and some of the experience, the lived experience of LGBTQ folks who, in identifying as LGBTQ, are being true to themselves in a profound way that often is countercultural, often like in the Gospels, this idea of like, you have to leave your father and mother and come follow me. Well, some of us really do have to, divorce ourselves from our family of origin.
Wow.
And sometimes that's we don't want that. Sometimes we're thrown out, right? Sometimes
Yeah.
as kids, LGBTQ folks are rejected by their parents, and other times it's maybe less violent than that. But there is a come follow the way and the truth and the life for LGBTQ folks is inside, and it is in the way of being true to themselves, and that's where life is.
That's, you kind of heard my reaction in your initial statement. That's the first time I've heard that. This is probably the third time I've asked the context of this question to someone, right? And this is probably one of the most profound perspectives that I've heard. Thank you so much for sharing that. I have an understanding of exactly kind of what you mean by the, by the refreshing realization that you're kind of coming into something new, because that's kind of what I felt my journey kind of away. And that's what's going to bring us probably to at least the first topic of meaty discussion here between us. So I my thing is kind of about inclusion, right? The Inclusion Cafe, my work, my professional life, as well as my personal life, is all about the inclusivity of society, of developing inclusion in the workplace. And when I was heavily, part of my religion and faith, one of the things that started having me not so much question, but just like raise my eyebrows was the opposite impact of inclusion I saw, right? And I don't think everyone sees it that way, but what are your thoughts around that? Does religion have a negative impact on inclusion?
I would say it's ambivalent. I mean, there's not a set impact. I think about religion as a way and sort of a religious identity. I use actually the term religious orientation, like we use sexual orientation. It's like, well, and this is not my invention, but people in the sociology of religion talk about, well, how do people and communities orient themselves around religion? Like, what's our relationship to these religious traditions, which are effectively like great conversations? It's sort of an interaction around some of the most pressing questions facing humanity. So of course there's any tradition, there's somebody who are in it and some who are not in it. Like, I know that conversation, I'm familiar with that conversation, or I'm not. familiar with
Right.
that conversation, you know? So there's of course, an exclusivity about that. And at the same time, I think any conversation, any great conversation about, you know, the most pressing questions that face humanity are open. We can step into those questions. As a Catholic Christian, stepped into the great Islamic conversation by becoming a
Yeah.
scholar of Islam, you know. So I'm not Muslim. I'm a you know, instead of a Islamophobe, I'm an Islamophile. You know, I'm a lover of Muslims and I'm a lover of Islam, and I'm not a member of that uh, as an adherent to the religion. Uh, so, you know, I orient around the Islamic tradition in a particular way. It's exclusive in the sense that, yeah, I'm still like quite clear about where I am in terms of my religious adherence or affiliation. Um, and by the way, of course, there are, just like there are bisexual folks who are, you know, who love and are loved by people of different genders. There are uh, religious folks in the sense of multiple religious belonging, and sometimes, you
Mhm.
know, they have let's say a Jewish a mother and a Buddhist father, and they find themselves naturally and from birth even part of both of those traditions, and they find their own way of being uh, included in multiple religions, and that can happen in different pathways in different ways, not just by birth. Um, but yes, there's something about exclusion inclusion that is I think inherent to religious traditions, but at the same time, you know, there's a lot of nuance and possibility there that we might not so easily see.
You know, I again, great perspective, Dominic, and I like the way you explained it. It almost seems like it's up to that individual to take those steps and kind of not force inclusion, but create inclusion and understanding of other religions. And outside of religion, I know we're talking a lot about religion, but just culture in general. One of the things, and I'm just going to be honest, that frustrates me is our inability as a society to be okay with talking openly about religion
Mhm.
and politics, right? In the workplace, and even as equal or as equal challenges, talking about it in society, right? I don't think as a society, because we've forcibly allowed ourselves to not talk about these things, we haven't developed the skills to talk about these
Yeah.
things, right? And I believe the key way of growth is through conversation. Our outside bodies grow from working out, lifting weights, and running. Maybe not mine, but I believe on the inside, we grow from digesting perspectives, insights that are different from ours, that challenge us. I mean, how can we grow in an area if we're not talking about it and having conversations?
Yes, yes, I fully agree. I mean, I would say that this point is part of why I studied religion and studied my own religion first, studied Christian theology, but also Islamic theology. America is a funny place in the world in terms of our public discourse about religion, or about the way that it is a taboo in the workplace, or, you know, in political arenas. We're, you know, an extremely religious society
Yeah.
in terms of church going, in terms of active and you know, sort of explicit affiliation with not just Christian churches, but of course all the religions of the world here
Yeah.
in this very pluralistic country. Um, and despite all of that religiosity, many of us find ourselves at a loss of words, a loss of channels of communication. Like, oh, how do we talk about this? Even from evangelical folks to Catholic folks, for example.
Yeah.
Um, you know, public discourse, conversation, you know, in society is about being able to talk rationally.
Right.
It's about being able to speak using our critical thinking skills.
Mhm.
And I think part of the problem in America that relates to this taboo or this, lack of conversation about religion is that our religious educations often are at like a second or third grade level, even when we're grown adults,
Yeah.
with graduate degrees in business or law or medicine. Well, we went to catechism, or, daddy taught me the 10 Commandments, or maybe we went to Sunday school, or, we went to, but it stops at childhood.
Yeah.
And we don't grow up our theological understanding of our own traditions to match our intellectual capacities, or, by the way, our emotional capacities or our spiritual
Yeah.
experiences will continue on. So I'm really committed to the need for religious education as a way to make possible more public discourse and conversation about religion.
Something I've noticed, Dominic, is for us to revert back to that like childhood interest, right? A lot of times it comes in a bad time of our life, right? We're forced to kind of face, okay, I need to start working on me and growing in this area, so on and so forth. And how cool would it be, like you kind of alluded to, if it was just continuous growth, right? From
Yeah.
childhood, that we didn't have to wait for something tragic or saddening or something like that to kind of kick us back and get us more interested in that part of ourselves, right?
Yeah.
And not only that, interested in other people,
Yes.
right? I mean, look at what we've had to go through to get a larger majority on board with just equality, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, and another point I wanted to make is around conversation and the types of conversation. So I view conversation in kind of two aspects or focus areas or columns, whatever you want to call them.
Mm.
So we have a conversation to inform, right? Or to, well, actually three, I apologize, to inform. We have a conversation to learn, and we have a conversation to persuade, right?
Mm.
And I think out of those three types of conversations, I think especially around this topic in this area, we need to have more conversations to learn
Yeah.
about the person we're talking to learn about where they're coming from, how they formulate their insights and perspectives and ideas, versus what it is 98% of the time when it comes to religion or politics is to persuade. You need to
Mm.
believe what I believe, and you
Mm.
need to believe it in the context, the dogma, the whatever. And I think that is a large issue. We need to
Yes.
change the types of conversations we're having.
Yes. Yes.
Hmm.
Um, interreligious dialogue, conversation across lines of religious affiliation has been part of my life, especially since I was 22 years old and I moved to Egypt. I was teaching in an all boys Catholic Jesuit high school, where about half the kids were Muslim and half Christian, and I didn't know that much about Islam. And I was living in a Muslim majority country and city. Cairo is about 20 million of your closest friends. So I had lots of conversations with both Orthodox Coptic Christians and Muslims and others to understand, like, well, what is this? What is that? How do you think about this? I mean, it was not a book education, but it was definitely these conversations to learn. I had so much to learn, and I knew that. In Egyptian society, and I would say in many of the Arab societies that I have since lived and worked in, religion is a constant topic of public discourse and conversation. Now, I'm not saying that those are always a model for that we should follow. In many cases, it is in this kind of persuasive mode that you're saying is has its own problems, but. Yeah, I'm absolutely with you that this kind of natural curiosity and this wondering and asking folks and like, well, why do you believe that? And I think to some degree we in America avoid religious conversations precisely because we're like, well, I'm not supposed to proselytize. I'm not supposed to try to convince others to come to my religion. And so then I don't even know how to have a conversation about religion. There's no other, like folks maybe only think that persuasion is the only kind of conversation I can have about religion. So then it becomes private. It becomes, just kind of held inside.
Yeah. There's so much, Dominic, we could kind of go into here, but there's other topics I want us to cover during the episode, and we're going to make a full pivot, just giving the listeners a little bit of preface. So, in Flourishing Gays, your company focuses on career and growth and development of senior leaders, right? Executives. And things like that. So let's bring it into the workplace here, and let's talk about inclusion, career development of senior professional members in the workplace of the LGBTQ community. So let's start kind of at the ground level here. What challenges are LGBTQ plus community still facing, both kind of maybe at the non-leadership and at the leadership level? What are the key challenges that they're still facing right now? And this can be broad.
Yeah. Well, I'll start with the sort of more senior folks, because in many ways, we assume, oh, you kind of got it figured out. You've made it to, I don't know, whatever, executive vice president, or you've become a partner in the law firm or the consulting firm. And so you've succeeded. You've done it. Like you broke through the barriers and you found your way, and and those folks are looked to mentor the junior LGBTQ folks and others. It's like the ERGs are not meant to serve these executives. The executives, gay though they may be, are asked to sponsor the ERGs and provide help and support. So I started Flourishing Gays, exploring what the needs were, but when I recognized this, it's lonely at the top kind of phenomenon, the particular ways that it hits LGBTQ folks, I recognize that there's little support for the ongoing leadership development and personal development and even professional development of the most senior folks who are gay, bi, queer, or trans. And I'm focusing on men in part because the experience of being a queer man is very different from being a queer woman. And I would have to partner with lesbians and queer women in order to create programs that I felt were kind of properly customized to meet their needs, which are distinct. There's some overlap, of course, but so what are the needs? Well, I think there is a problem for, let's say, the successful folks of living a prefabricated life. Following the path to success that goes through, prestigious colleges and university degrees and a certain maybe professional like set of experiences and positions, and even has other parts like fancy vacations that go here or there, or owning a home in this neighborhood or that neighborhood, wherever the city is, has its own prestige areas. And it's like, I say prefabricated because it's like, okay, somebody else, like society in general, sort of presented this punch list of here's what success looks like, guys.
Yeah.
Right. And that has its own, I think this actually pertains maybe even more to straight folks than to LGBTQ folks, but it has its own, there's a punch list for gay men too, right? And we get to a point in our lives where it's like, oh my God, okay, I've been living my punch list that was presented to me so long ago for so long, trying to prove myself again and again and again to this group and that group, or to this company or that company. It's like, do I really want to live my whole life proving myself to someone else?
Mm.
And so I think the need that I'm pointing to of more senior LGBTQ professionals is to begin to ask, not just in their sexual orientation or gender expression, what's my vocation? What's my authenticity? Where's my liberation or salvation, to go back a little bit to these categories we spoke of earlier, but also in my work life, also in my home life, also in what I do with my free time. What are my own dreams?
Mm.
If I were going to pick up the pen and author my own punch list, what's my list? Not the one that was handed to me. This is a real challenge, I think, that really faces, well, all of us, executives in particular, but LGBTQ folks in their own distinct way.
Mm. And this is something that's, I mean, it's across the board. It's affecting all industries, all locations. You know, it's a nationwide issue, right? I was talking to a good friend of mine. You may know him, John Carlson. I don't know if you've had a chance to meet John. Oh, I'll introduce you guys. Have a great conversation. We had an episode where we talked about, you know, challenges LGBTQ community still face. Similar question I just asked you. And, you know, he dropped some statistics about, you know, 30 something percent, or it was close to maybe 40%, Dominic, of queer leaders in industry right now are still not out at work, right?
Yeah.
And, you know, we're talking about, I'm making an assumption here, I'm talking about those that are out who are still facing challenges in career growth and development. I can't imagine what those that aren't are still facing, right? As far as challenges, right? It's like compounded.
Yes.
So,
yeah, and that's, I mean, I created the Flourishing Gays Mastermind program to bring together the men in this situation who are yearning for something more. They might not even know exactly what it is, but to come in a small group and create a community where they can support each other in, you know, I often use the word unfurling, you know, like unfurling more of themselves, like this gorgeous tapestry of magnificence and beauty and surprise and marvel, you know, that takes courage to really be ourselves fully. And I don't mean just, oh, I'm gay, but like really to be, you know, yourselves and all the weird and wonderful parts of who you are. We need each other for that. We all need others. And we need sometimes more than just our like close friends or mentors. We need other people who can remind us of other ways of being. Yeah, so that's, you know, what you're speaking to is really a sort of crisis of human potential that
like that.
I think the whole, in a way, the whole diversity, equity, and inclusion movement or, you know, attention is about this crisis of human potential. And of course, it's not just for the marginalized folks. It's not just for the queer folks or the white folks or the Christian folks in America. The queer folks or the Black folks or the non-Christian folks in America. It's for the dominant groups too, right?
Right.
So straight folks and white folks and Christian folks in America have plenty to gain from their unfurling, because you know what? The secret is we're all weird and we're all wonderful. And we all have parts of ourselves that, you know, we cover and that we downplay.
Yes, absolutely.
I mean, this is, you know, Kenji Yoshino's point in his book Covering about, you know, that like everybody is covering. And I mean, Jennifer Brown talks about this a lot as well. And so I think by the, you know, the queer folks and the Black folks and the Muslim folks in America or the Christian folks in Egypt, you know, the minorities have something so wonderful to contribute to the folks in the dominant groups, the courage to be ourselves more fully. Oops, I think you're on mute.
I am so glad that you referenced the book Covering. I remember, I think I read that probably about a year and a half ago, and it's kind of one of those books you like to go back to. Um, so when I guess kind of another question I have, Dominic. Sorry, I am full of questions for you today.
Great.
I don't think I've
That's
had
why we're here.
so many questions for a guest. It's just it's the fascinating the content you can bring in the perspective. Um, so when I work with clients, and I kind of come in the door, and everybody's committed to diversity and creating inclusion. It seems like a lot of times the starting point, it's not with the LGBTQ community. It's not, hey Joe, I want to increase the leadership of my and representation of my LGBTQ employees. It's always increased representation of Black, African American, Hispanic, Latino, veterans, individuals with disability, and women in leadership. And it's almost to that formula across
Yeah.
any type of client that I work with.
Yeah.
So my question is that just a me thing, or are companies not paying attention to this like they should, or are companies getting better at it? I mean, what's your thoughts on that? And what can we do if it is the latter, and they're kind of sucking wind there? What can we do to help them to prioritize this?
Yeah. I mean, it's a great question, and I don't have sort of the tip of my tongue, let's say, some kind of statistical understanding of
Right.
either the ongoing challenges or the ongoing initiatives to counteract anti-Black racism or sexism or patriarchy versus, let's say, homophobic or LGBTQ
Right.
sentiments. However, I will say I think they're different. I think that the the problems and the systemic bias and even persecution, if you want to say, like that faces LGBTQ folks is quite different from that facing Black folks in America.
Mm.
Um, I mean, I think it's less economic to start with. Especially if you talk about white gay men as a kind of and it's like a privileged minority, right? White gay men are often more affluent and have more disposable income, and so some even within the LGBTQ umbrella are like, oh, are white gay men, cisgender, white gay men really, oppressed, or is there really a problem? It's different, and because of the affluence, it's like, yeah, it's not, this isn't about money. It is on these more this, I think this crisis of human potential piece absolutely hits uh, um, gay men, for example, whether white or Black, really. Um, so when we talk about the initiatives that companies can or should take to counter homophobia, and we compare them to those for countering racism, I think we have to take into account the nature of the challenges that and the nature of this history. I mean, this country is founded on anti-Black racism. It ain't founded on anti-queer homophobia. It's
Right.
Anti-Black racism is a bigger crisis for America. It just is, and we have a lot more sort of uh, um, I think hurt and work to do to sort of root out white supremacy. Yeah. The crisis of in terms of straight versus gay or queer folks, I think is just quite different. So that's it's a huge topic and one worth further thought and conversation about. But I think when companies ignore LGBTQ initiatives or create an environment that allows queer people to come out and come out fully, not just in name, but really, I think what they miss out on are things like creative problem solving.
Yeah.
It's firmer relationships among colleagues and with clients,
Right.
that are deeper and more real and genuine.
Mm-hmm.
so those are some of the places that I go to when I think about what's kind of left on the table when we keep heteronormative in the workplace.
Mm. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. We're getting close to time, Dominic, and I knew you and I would probably run out of time before we run out of content to talk about. But these last couple minutes, I kind of would like for you to speak to those leaders who may be members of the LGBTQ community and listening to the podcast. What advice would you give them to start investing into their career development, overcome some of the challenges we've talked about today? It's you, them, one-on-one. You're out on your porch in your long johns and you're having those conversations. What would you like to say?
Wow.
Not to put you on the spot. And
yeah.
I apologize for mentioning your long johns.
Yeah, in New York these days, we need them to just sit outside and have a drink at the restaurant. Well, the coming out experience that many LGBTQ folks have had is a resource for us. It is like a touchstone of courage, of creativity, and sort of finding out what's on the other side of risk. My advice to LGBTQ people who have come out is to use that touchstone, to go back to that journey of coming out and coming into themselves as a source of ongoing courage and creativity in crafting the rest of their lives and of their careers and of their relationships, to be truly weird and wonderful in their unique way, whatever the prefabricated molds that other gay men or other lesbians or other people in their social cliques or social scenes give them. Have the courage, or find again the courage, to come out as you.
I love that. I have got to get a t-shirt that says "Be weird, be wonderful."
Well, this is part of the credo, the Flourishing Gays credo, is that the first tenet is that we are all weird and wonderful.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
And this is on my my website, flourishinggays.com. It's like, this is the landing page. Another piece of it is we are all made to flourish. It's our destiny. It's our vocation. It's what we're created for.
Well, I think that's a perfect way to close us out. We've gone from the Holy Land into the corporate suite. Dominic, this has been an amazing conversation. Thank you for coming on the podcast and joining me today in the Inclusion Cafe.
It's been a real pleasure. Thank you, Joe.
Absolutely.